Why do we travel? Maybe it's to get away, to step outside the routine, feel something different for a while. But it's more than that, isn't it? There's something about being out here, on the road, with nothing but the next mile ahead of you. It's the unknown that draws us in, a pull that's hard to explain, but undeniable. It's the way the world opens up in front of you, the vastness of it all, the mountains that scrape the sky, the endless plains that stretch beyond the horizon, the way the landscape shifts and changes from bustling cities to quiet, forgotten roads. It's in the little moments, the smell of dust on the air, the wind on your face, the colours of a sunset that seem to defy description. You're somewhere unfamiliar, but somehow it feels right. Here, time feels different. It stretches and bends. There are the long, quiet hours where the only sound is the hum of the engine and your thoughts wander to places you've long ignored. And then there's the chaos, those unexpected moments where everything comes to a halt, a breakdown on a desolate road, and you're left with nothing but the vast sky above, and the silence feels as heavy as the earth beneath your feet. And in those moments, it's easy to feel small, to be reminded of how little control we really have. But that's part of it too. The wonder, the awe, the way these places demand our attention, our respect, the way they make us feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. There's something humbling about being out here, the way the world dwarfs you, yet somehow invites you in. It strips away all the noise, the distractions, until all that's left is you and the road. Nothing to hide behind, nothing to distract you. And it's funny how, when you strip everything away, what's left feels more real, more alive. Some roads have stories woven into their very dirt. Roads like the D915, known as one of the most dangerous in the world. It snakes through the Turkish mountains, narrow and unforgiving. The cliffs drop away into nothing, each turn sharper than the last. But what they don't tell you is that it's also one of the most beautiful roads you'll ever drive. The sun bathes the peaks in a warm glow, while the valleys unfurl beneath, like paintings you'll never see anywhere else. And as you climb higher, inching closer to the clouds, it's not the fear that grips you, it's the wonder, the beauty in the danger. It's these roads, the ones that make you question why you're even on them, that often lead to the most unforgettable places. Then there's the kind of journey you can't predict, the kind that leaves you stuck, stranded on an old Soviet ferry in the middle of the Caspian Sea. What started as a straightforward crossing from Azerbaijan to Kazakhstan turned into 4 days of waiting for the winds to settle, the waves out at sea to calm. At first, it felt like a delay, a frustration. But somewhere between the meals shared with fellow travellers and the quiet moments staring out at that endless stretch of water, something shifted. It wasn't about the destination anymore. It was about those connections, about finding yourself in the middle of nowhere with people from all over the world and realizing that even in this vast, unfamiliar place, there's something familiar, a shared understanding. We weren't going anywhere, but in those 4 days, we discovered something deeper. And then the desert, western Kazakhstan. A landscape that feels more like science fiction than reality. Ridges rising out of the ground, like the bones of the earth itself. I remember standing there, looking out across that alien world, thinking, is this real? Is this planet mine? It felt like stepping into another world, one stripped of all the noise, all the distractions. You could see the curve of the horizon, a reminder of just how small we are. But it was more than that. It was like the world was opening its arms, saying, look at what you've been missing. Look at what lies beyond the cities, the maps, the compass you know. In that moment, I felt it, the pull to keep going, to see what other wonders were waiting around the next bend. Travel isn't always about where you end up. Sometimes it's about what you find along the way. It's the road that twists and turns, revealing the moments you didn't plan for, those moments of awe and surprise that remind you why you set out in the first place. The thrill isn't in escaping, but in discovering. It's in the way these places, these forgotten roads, invite you to step outside of yourself and into something far bigger. And the further you go, the more the world opens up. It's the curiosity that keeps us moving forward. The question of what lies just beyond the next horizon, waiting to be found. The road teaches you things you didn't expect to learn. You come for the beauty, for the freedom, for the wide open spaces, but what you find is something else entirely. In Istanbul, it was 2 lug nuts rattling loose as the wheel threatened to come off. A minor crisis perhaps, but in that moment, you feel the vulnerability of it all. The realization that something as small as a nut could bring the whole journey to a grinding halt. But that was just the beginning. The miles kept adding up, and so did the problems. The oil leak that never seemed to stop. The engine running rich, guzzling fuel like it was free. The camshaft sensor cables frayed and dying, another part of the car beginning to give out. Then came Uzbekistan. We were trying to escape the brutal conditions of the main roads, pitted with holes and dust, barely drivable. So we took a different route, an unfinished highway, hoping to make it out quicker. It felt like a solution until we smashed the exhaust, the car roaring in protest. By the time we pulled off the road, it was 6 a.m. We'd been driving all night, desperate to keep going, but now we were lying under the car, tools scattered in the dirt, exhaust broken, spirits fraying. There's something surreal about moments like these, the world around us so quiet, and all you hear is the sound of your own heartbeat as you wonder how much more the car can take. Kazakhstan wasn't much kinder. We couldn't find brake pads anywhere in the country, and we needed them. Desperation led us to a local mechanic who took one look at the problem and said he'd make it work. The car didn't care if it wasn't perfect, neither did we. And Kyrgyzstan, that's where it felt like the car might finally give up. A smashed sump, oil pressure dropping, and a ticking clock that said the engine could seize at any moment. stranded on the side of a road, we tore the car down, trying to assess the damage. But in the end, it wasn't about fixing the problem perfectly, it was about getting just enough to keep moving, to push forward, despite the uncertainty, despite the odds. It's strange how these struggles change you. There's a rawness to it. The frustration, the exhaustion, the constant worry that the next failure could be the last. But there's something else too, a resilience you never knew you had. You start to realize that these setbacks aren't just obstacles. They're part of the journey itself. You come to appreciate the struggle, not just as something to endure, but as something that makes the triumph sweeter. It's in the dirt, the exhaustion, the countless repairs, where you find something you didn't know you were looking for. Perseverance. Growth. The realization that even when the road feels impossible, you can still find a way forward. There's a strange comfort in the silence of the open road. Miles away from home, from the familiar, solitude becomes a companion in itself. The world feels bigger when everything you know is miles away. Out here, it feels like you're the only familiar thing. Every road stretches a little further. Every horizon seems more distant. It's not loneliness, it's space. Space to think, space to reflect on all that's behind you and the long way still ahead. And then, sometimes by chance, you meet others, strangers just as far from home as you are. Campfires crackle, meals are passed around, and stories flow under the stars. The silence is gone, replaced by laughter, shared glances, and that quiet understanding. You're in this together. Exploring everything we came across with open minds, from ancient Silk Road towns in Uzbekistan to abandoned aircraft rusting in the desert, to sketchy bridges swaying over rushing glacial waters. We met a nomad in Kyrgyzstan, learned about their life, and were offered horse milk. Let's just say it's an acquired taste. There's an unspoken understanding. When the journey turns rough, when cars get stuck or break down, there's no question, everyone helps. You tow, you push, you do whatever's needed. Because out here, it's what you do. It's automatic. Strangers become friends. And then, before you know it, those friends become part of the journey itself. You spend every waking minute together, laughing, exploring, facing whatever comes. The hours blur into days, the days into weeks. It feels like it will never end. But it does. And when the time comes to say goodbye, the weight of the road shifts again. It's not just solitude, it's the feeling of being untethered. You're the last familiar face in a world that keeps moving. But in that moment, it feels like the road just got a little bit longer again. From strangers to companions to memories. Just a moment on the journey. And then you're alone again. The Pamir Highway, a road built not just through the Pamir Mountains, but through time itself. Winding its way through the ancient, rugged terrain of Central Asia, it's one of the highest and most desolate roads on Earth. At its peak, it rises to 4,600 meters, where the air is thin and the world seems both vast and impossibly small. The highway winds through Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, where it once formed a vital link to the ancient Silk Road trade route. As we drive for days along the border with Afghanistan, with the jagged mountains of the country on the horizon, knowing that just across the river, life carried on in much the same way as it did here. Isolated, raw, but filled with the same kind of beauty that transcends distance, language, and borders. Out here, in the high mountains, the landscape is both beautiful and unforgiving. Towering peaks rise up like ancient gods, the valleys stretching out beneath them, vast and untouched. The roads, carved from rock and dust, seem to disappear into the horizon, leading you further into a world that feels both timeless and surreal. The journey here is not for the faint-hearted. The road is a test of endurance for both driver and machine. We had already driven thousands of kilometers, but it was here, along this highway, that our car truly began to falter. The constant shaking, the pounding from miles of unpaved road, it all took a toll. And then the lower control arm failed. We asked around. Word spread quickly in these remote villages, and before long, we were brought to the home of a Tajik family. They spoke no English, but there was no need for words. The father, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had solved problems like this countless times before, got to work, welding together our Fiat as if it were the most natural thing in the world. After, they welcomed us into their home. We were strangers, but they treated us like family. We shared their food, their warmth. That night, we slept within their walls, warmed not just by their hospitality, but by the understanding that out here, kindness is a currency far more valuable than money. It's the kind of kindness that feels rare, like something you'd only find at the very edges of the world, where people have learned that survival is best met with open hands and open hearts. It's in these places where the world feels at its most rugged that you find something you didn't expect. In the chaos of broken roads and failing cars, in the harshness of the landscape, there's a beauty that isn't just in the mountains or the rivers. It's in the people, in their generosity, in the way they welcome you without question, without hesitation. This is the beauty at the edge of the world. It's not just in the grandeur of the mountains or the vastness of the sky. It's in the small human moments, the quiet acts of kindness that remind you that no matter how far you travel, no matter how isolated the road may seem, you're never really alone. Because out here, where the land is wild and untamed, it's the people who make it feel like home. Time moves quietly. You don't always notice it slipping away, but it's there, just beneath the surface, always moving forward. On the road, you start to feel it differently. Each moment becomes clearer, more vivid, as if time wants you to notice its presence. Travel has a way of sharpening your awareness, not just of the places you pass through, but of the passing of time itself. When every day offers something new, something unexpected, you begin to feel the weight of each and every second. It's a strange irony. Travelling makes you aware of time passing, but only because you're using it more intentionally, more richly. It's a contrast to the routine back home, where days can blur together in a comfortable yet forgettable rhythm. Out here, on the road, every minute counts. You feel it in the quiet morning hours, waking up at 4 a.m. in Cappadocia, watching the sky fill with balloons drifting overhead. The air is still, the scene is fleeting, but in that moment, it feels like everything has come together for just that one perfect experience. Then, there are those rare moments where time seems to stand still. After weeks of waiting, paperwork, closed borders, we finally had our cars back. With the sun setting over Azerbaijan, we drove towards a mud volcano just outside Baku. The road stretched ahead, and the weight of the days behind us fell away. Covered in mud, laughing without a care for what came next, it felt as though time had stopped, and all that mattered was the freedom of that evening, the relief of the present. The reality is, time never stops, but travel has a way of making us more aware of it, not in a way that weighs us down, but in a way that urges us to live more fully, more deliberately. You realize that what makes each moment meaningful is the knowledge that it won't last forever, and perhaps that's the quiet truth of it all. We don't control the clock. We can only decide how to spend the hours we're given. Back home, the days can blur together, slipping by unnoticed. But out here, on the road, time becomes something else, something you feel more deeply. Every moment, every experience, every connection takes on a sharper edge, because you know it won't come again. We don't have forever, but we do have right now. Disaster tends to rear its ugly head at the most inopportune moments. Just under 200 kilometers from the final destination, the third of 2 spare tires blows. There are no more to replace it. It's too far to safely drive on a flat, but too close to give in or give up. Trundling along the desolate highway, we attempt to relieve as much load as possible on the Unwell corner. A truck flags us down, offering help. Despite repeated attempts to patch the flat spare, it refuses to hold any more air. We continue on, but the fuel gauge is dropping faster than normal. The flat tyre is draining power from the engine, yet there's nothing nearby, no towns, no help. Travel teaches you that each moment of triumph is tethered to the challenges that came before it. And through every setback, there's a quiet determination to keep going, to push just a little further. In these final hours, the road strips away all the noise, all the distractions. It's just us, the machine that's carried us this far, and the struggle to keep moving forward. The wheel implodes. Steel caves in on itself, preventing the wheel from turning. We swap it out for another flat. A fuel station appears just as the needle creeps onto E. We strike up a conversation with some local lorry drivers, convincing them to let us onto an empty car carrier for a small fee. Success, but short-lived. An hour later, and still 30 kilometers from the destination, the truckers must unload us. They cannot drive any further in. It's not close enough. There's only one option left. We add 10 litres of fuel to the tank. The journey is far from over. 25 kilometres. Progress is slow. The second tyre deteriorates. 20 kilometres. The road is bumpy and loud. Slow traffic is a blessing in disguise. Bystanders watch in awe. Against all odds, we're moving forward. 18 kilometres. The wheel separates from the hub, sending the car skidding across the pavement at a highway intersection. The car grinds to a halt, 3 lanes blocked, 2 by the car, 1 by the wheel, lying in the murky darkness. Horns blare, engines rev as commuters speed past. Another driver collides with the lost wheel, too fast to avoid it in the night. We recover the wheel from under the other car and install the final spare, still flat, onto the hub. It's now or never. Caution is a luxury we no longer have. "15 kilometres. Rush hour subsides. The roads quieten, but not by much. 10 kilometres. Thoughts turn to the final few corners needed to reach the end. 8 kilometres. Slower and slower now, not wanting to risk another catastrophic failure. Such was the fate of the other 2 spares. This time, there could be no replacement. The wheel must make it. 6 kilometres. It's like watching a broken clock, but the distance slowly ticks down. Minutes and hours blur, but still progress is made. The finish draws closer. 5 kilometres. From just under 200 kilometres to 5. Failure is no longer an option. The steering is juddery. Warning lights flash on the dashboard. Any wiring near the wheel well was long ago shredded by the flailing rubber of a ruptured tyre. 4 kilometres. A lump forms in my throat. This isn't just a 200-kilometre push. It's the final leg of a 10,000-kilometre marathon, a 5-year expedition. An expedition that's seen the highest highs and the lowest lows. An expedition of pain and triumph, love and hate. An expedition that will reach its ultimate conclusion in mere minutes as the car limps along at walking pace. Just one more corner. 1 kilometre. Tears well up. It hits me. 1 kilometre left. That's all that's left of this journey for this special little car. The car that taught me so much about the world. The car that led me to so many beautiful relationships with friends I still cherish. The car that changed how I see the world, opening me to opportunities I hadn't previously imagined. And now, somehow, there are only a few hundred metres left. The finish was always inevitable, but never easy. On the journey, the finish is a distant thought, some future event that never feels real. But it was real, and it was here. I turn off the car, and the emotions I've held back for so long finally overwhelm me. 0 kilometres. It's done. The road has ended, but the journey hasn't. Not really. Every mile was a lesson. every setback a chance to grow. And as we sit here, engine off, the weight of everything that's happened sinks in. This was never about a destination. It was about finding something more within the chaos, within the struggle, within myself.